Upon entering the Millionaire's office to deliver land sale documents, the humble farmer froze when she saw her childhood photo in a black frame on the wall. What she said left him speechless. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked earth, its rays dancing off the withered cornstalks like heat mirages in hell. Aurora Whitfield knelt in what used to be her prize vegetable garden, her calloused fingers sifting through dirt that felt more like sand between her palms. 3 months without a drop of rain. 3 months watching everything she'd built with Maeve slowly die under the relentless Texas sky. "Damn drought," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the whistling wind that carried nothing but dust and broken dreams. Standing up, Aurora brushed the dirt from her worn jeans and gazed across the 100 acres that had been her world for as long as she could remember. The Whitfield farm, though it had never really felt like the name belonged to her, stretched out in all directions, a patchwork of brown and brittle gold where green should have been. The old oak tree near the farmhouse stood like a sentinel, its branches reaching skyward as if pleading with the heavens for mercy that never came. She walked toward the house, her boots crunching on the parched grass. The 2-story white farmhouse with its wraparound porch had seen better days. Paint peeled from the shutters like old skin, and the porch swing creaked in the wind, a lonely sound that matched the ache in her chest. This place held every memory she had, every moment of happiness, every sense of belonging she'd ever known. Inside, the kitchen still smelled faintly of Maeve's famous apple pie, though it had been 6 months since the old woman had passed away. Aurora ran her fingers along the worn wooden countertop where Maeve had taught her to knead bread, where they'd snapped green beans together on countless summer evenings, where they'd shared quiet conversations over steaming cups of coffee before dawn. The stack of bills on the kitchen table seemed to mock her. Electric company, final notice. Property taxes, overdue. Bank statements showing a balance that wouldn't cover groceries for a week, let alone keep the farm running. She'd sold everything she could. The tractor, most of the livestock, even Maeve's antique china set that had been in storage for years. Nothing left but the land itself, and now even that was slipping through her fingers like the dust outside. Aurora touched the small scar on her forehead, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. The crescent-shaped mark was barely visible now, faded with time, but Maeve used to trace it gently with her finger when Aurora had nightmares. "Your brave little battle scar," Maeve would whisper, "shows the world you're a survivor." But Aurora had never felt like much of a survivor. Most of her childhood before age 7 was a blur of fragments, flashes of a big house with tall windows, the sound of laughter echoing through long hallways, the scent of roses in a garden. Maeve had told her it was normal, that trauma could make memories fuzzy. "The mind protects itself, honey," she'd say whenever Aurora asked about her past. "Some things are better left buried." The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the caller ID and sighed. Marcus from the bank. "Hello, Aurora. I'm calling about the Hawthorne Industries offer." Aurora's stomach twisted. Hawthorne Industries had been circling like vultures for months. Ever since word got out about her financial troubles, their offer was generous. More than generous, really. Enough to pay off all her debts and still have money left over to start fresh somewhere else. But the thought of leaving felt like tearing out her own heart. "I need more time, Marcus." "Aurora, honey, you don't have more time. The foreclosure proceedings start next week. This offer is your lifeline." She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 20 years of memories pressing down on her shoulders. Who are they exactly? This Hawthorne Industries, big agricultural conglomerate out of Chicago. They've been buying up farms all through East Texas. Word is they're looking for properties with good water rights and development potential. Your land sits right on top of the Carrizo-Wilcox Aquifer. That's liquid gold. "Honey," after hanging up, Aurora walked to Maeve's old bedroom and pulled out the wooden chest from under the bed. Inside were the few documents Maeve had left her. Birth certificate, adoption papers, medical records from when she'd first arrived at Maeve's doorstep as a 7-year-old with no memory of how she'd gotten the scar on her forehead or why she'd been found wandering alone on a country road outside Abilene. The adoption papers were yellowed with age, the ink faded but still readable. Aurora Whitfield, age approximately 7 years, found abandoned, no known family. Maeve had given her the Whitfield name, had created an identity for a little girl who'd had none. But sometimes, late at night, Aurora wondered about the life she'd lost. the family that might have been looking for her. She picked up the business card Marcus had given her weeks ago. Adakus Hawthorne, CEO, Hawthorne Industries. The name stirred something deep in her memory. Like an echo from a dream she couldn't quite recall. Hawthorne. Why did that name feel familiar? The next morning, Aurora stood in her bedroom, staring at the single suitcase on her bed. She'd packed light, a few changes of clothes, Maeve's Bible, and the wooden jewelry box that had been her only possession when Maeve found her. The jewelry box was empty, except for a small silver locket that wouldn't open, but Aurora had never been able to bring herself to pry it apart. The bus ticket to Chicago lay on her dresser like a one-way passage to the unknown. She'd never been further than Dallas in her entire life, and the thought of navigating a city like Chicago made her palms sweat. But what choice did she have? The farm was dying, and she was dying with it. She picked up the manila envelope containing all the property deeds, survey maps and legal documents that would transfer ownership of her childhood home to a stranger. Her hands trembled as she sealed it. Inside that envelope was everything she'd ever known, everything Maeve had worked for, everything that connected her to the only life she remembered. As she loaded her suitcase into her old pickup truck, Aurora took one last look at the farmhouse. The morning light caught the windows just right, making them gleam like golden eyes watching her leave. She touched her forehead scar one more time, remembering Maeve's words about being a survivor. "I'm sorry, Maeve," she whispered to the wind. "I tried to hold on, but I just can't do it anymore." The drive to the bus station in Abilene took 40 minutes through countryside that looked as defeated as she felt. Other farms showed the same signs of drought and desperation. Empty fields, foreclosure signs, dreams withering under the relentless sun. She wasn't the only one forced to make impossible choices at the station. As she climbed aboard the Greyhound bound for Chicago, Aurora pressed her face to the window and watched the Texas landscape roll by. Somewhere in that envelope was the future she'd never wanted. A new life in a city where nobody knew her name. But maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Maybe it was time to stop looking backward and start moving forward. She had no idea that the man waiting for her in that Chicago office tower had been looking for her for 20 years, or that the answers to all her questions about the past were locked away in a memory that trauma had sealed tight. All she knew was that tomorrow, she would sign papers that would change everything, and the life she'd known would become nothing more than a memory, fragile as dust in a Texas wind. The Greyhound bus wheezed to a stop at Chicago's Union Station, and Aurora stepped off into a world that might as well have been another planet. The noise hit her first. Car horns blaring, construction machinery grinding, thousands of voices blending into an urban symphony that made her ears ring. Back home, the loudest sound was usually the wind through the cornstalks or old Bessie lowing in the pasture. She clutched her worn leather purse tighter and followed the crowd through the massive terminal, her head tilted back to stare at the soaring ceiling. Everything here was built to make people feel small, she realized. The marble floors clicked under her boots with each step, echoing in a way that made her hyper-aware of how out of place she must look. "First time in Chicago?" asked the taxi driver as she slid into the back seat, her hands shaking slightly as she gave him the address. "Is it that obvious?" He chuckled, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Honey, you've got that deer in headlights look. Where are you from?" "Texas, little town called Abilene. Long way from home. Business or pleasure?" Aurora stared out the window at the towering buildings that seemed to stretch endlessly into the gray sky. "Business, I guess, though there's nothing pleasurable about it." The taxi wove through traffic that moved like a living thing, aggressive and unpredictable. Aurora pressed her palm against the cool window, watching pedestrians hurry past on sidewalks crowded with more people than lived in her entire county. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going, walking with purpose and speed that made her feel even more adrift. When the taxi pulled up in front of the Hawthorne Industries building, Aurora's breath caught in her throat. 50 floors of gleaming glass and steel rose into the clouds, reflecting the city back at itself in a dizzying kaleidoscope of light and shadow. The lobby was all polished marble and modern art, with a security desk that looked more like a spaceship control panel. "Aurora Whitfield to see Mr. Hawthorne," she told the security guard, her voice smaller than she'd intended. 40th floor. Express elevator on your right. They're expecting you." The elevator ride felt like launching into orbit. Her ears popped twice, and she gripped the brass handrail as the city shrank beneath her feet. When the doors finally opened, she stepped into a reception area that probably cost more than her entire farm. "Miss Whitfield?" A polished young woman in a designer suit stood up from behind a curved glass desk. "Mr. Hawthorne is ready for you. Right this way." Aurora followed her down a hallway lined with abstract paintings that made no sense to her rural sensibilities. The carpet was so thick it muffled every sound, creating an eerie quiet that felt unnatural after the chaos of the city streets below. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered glimpses of Chicago stretching to the horizon, a concrete jungle that seemed to go on forever. "He'll be with you in just a moment," the assistant said, gesturing to a leather chair outside an imposing oak door. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be nice, thank you." Aurora sat in the chair and tried to steady her nerves. The manila envelope containing her property deeds felt heavier than lead in her lap. Inside that envelope was everything: her past, her present, and apparently her future. She touched her forehead scar again, that nervous habit she'd never been able to break. The office door opened, and a man stepped out. Aurora's first thought was that he looked nothing like she'd expected. Adakus Hawthorne was tall and lean, with dark hair touched with silver at the temples, and eyes the color of storm clouds. There was something about his face that seemed familiar, though she was certain she'd never met him before. "Ms. Whitfield." His voice was deep, carefully controlled. "Thank you for making the trip. Please, come in." His office was enormous, with windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. The furniture was all dark wood and rich leather, the kind of understated elegance that whispered of old money and established power. But what caught Aurora's attention immediately was the massive oak desk in the center of the room, not because of its size, but because of what sat on it. A silver-framed photograph faced outward, clearly positioned where visitors would see it. The image showed a family of 4, a distinguished man in a suit, a beautiful woman with kind eyes, a young man who looked to be in his 20s, and a little girl with pigtails who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Aurora's steps faltered as she approached the desk. The little girl in the photograph had the same green eyes she saw in the mirror every morning, the same heart-shaped face, the same spattering of freckles across her nose. Even the way the child tilted her head slightly to the left was exactly how Aurora posed for pictures. "That little girl," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "She looks like me when I was small." Behind her, she heard the sound of papers scattering as they hit the floor. When she turned around, Adakus Hawthorne was staring at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Shock, recognition, and something that might have been hope all mixed together. "Your scar," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "On your forehead, how did you get it?" Aurora's hand flew instinctively to the crescent-shaped mark. I don't remember. Maeve, my adoptive mother, she said I had it when she found me. I was 7, wandering alone on a country road. They said it might have been from an accident, but I don't remember anything from before that day. Adakus moved closer, his eyes never leaving her face. "What's your full name?" "Aurora Whitfield," but Whitfield was Maeve's name. She adopted me when no one could figure out where I came from or who I belonged to. "Aurora," he repeated, and the way he said it made her shiver, like he was tasting a word he'd been dying to speak for years. "Do you remember anything else? Anything at all about your life before age 7? Just fragments, flashes of a big house with tall windows, the sound of laughter, someone pushing me on a swing in a garden full of roses?" She shook her head. "But they're not real memories. Not really, more like dreams, you know." Adakus walked to his desk and picked up the photograph with trembling hands. "This was taken 3 weeks before the fire," he said quietly. "That little girl you think looks like you? Her name was Aurora Hawthorne. She was my baby sister." The words hit Aurora like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, her legs suddenly unsteady. "That's not possible. I'm Aurora Whitfield. I've always been Aurora Whitfield. You fell out of the oak tree in our backyard," Adakus continued, his voice gaining strength as the pieces fell into place. 3 weeks before the fire that killed our parents, you hit your head on a root and got that scar. Mom was so worried about you, fussing over it for days." Aurora's vision started to blur around the edges. The room felt like it was spinning, and she gripped the back of a chair to keep from falling. "You're wrong. You have to be wrong. I would remember something that important. I would remember having a brother, But even as she said the words, images were flashing through her mind. Not the vague dream fragments she'd carried for years, but sharp, clear memories that felt like doors opening in her consciousness. A tall boy teaching her to tie her shoes, strong arms lifting her up to reach the top shelf in a library lined with books, a voice reading her bedtime stories, doing different character voices that made her giggle. "Addie," she whispered, the nickname falling from her lips like it had been waiting there for 20 years. "You used to call me Rory." Tears were streaming down Adakus's face now. 20 years of grief and guilt and desperate hope finally finding release. "I thought you were dead, Rory. I thought I'd lost you forever in that fire. I've been buying up land all over East Texas, hoping, praying that somehow, somewhere, I'd find a trace of you." Aurora sank into the chair, her legs no longer capable of supporting her weight. The manila envelope slipped from her numb fingers and scattered its contents across the expensive carpet. Deeds and surveys and legal documents that suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the impossible truth staring her in the face. "The farm," she said weakly. "You've been trying to buy my farm." "Our farm," Adakus corrected gently. "It's part of the original Hawthorne property. When I saw the name Whitfield on the deed, when I realized someone was living on land that had been in our family for generations, I had to investigate." He knelt beside her chair, his eyes searching her face. "I never dreamed. I never dared to hope." Aurora looked at the photograph again, really looked at it this time. The man and woman in the picture had Adakus's storm gray eyes and her own stubborn chin. The little girl was definitely her, not someone who looked like her, but actually her, captured in a moment of happiness she'd forgotten she'd ever experienced. "They're our parents," she said, the words feeling strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. "Were," Adakus corrected softly. "They died in the fire 20 years ago. But you're here, Rory, against all odds. After all these years, you're here." As the magnitude of the revelation settled over her, Aurora felt something shifting deep inside her chest. Not just the return of buried memories, but the filling of a void she hadn't even realized was there. For the first time in 20 years, she wasn't alone in the world. But with that realization came a chilling thought. If she had survived the fire that killed their parents, and if someone had found her wandering alone afterward, then what had really happened that night, and who was responsible for tearing their family apart? The silence in Adakus's office stretched between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Aurora, Rory, stared at the photograph, her mind reeling as more memories surfaced like bubbles rising from the depths of a dark pond. The feeling of small hands gripping a tire swing, the scent of her mother's perfume, something floral and expensive, her father's deep laugh echoing through a house that had felt as vast as a castle to her 7-year-old eyes. "I need to sit down," she whispered. Though she was already sitting, Adakus moved to the wet bar in the corner of his office and poured 2 glasses of whiskey with hands that still shook. "You're probably in shock," he said, his voice gentle. This is beyond anything either of us could have imagined." He handed her a glass, and she took a grateful sip, letting the burn chase away some of the numbness. "Tell me about the fire," she said quietly. "Tell me what really happened." Adakus settled into the chair across from her, suddenly looking older than his 40 years. "I was 20 when it happened. Away at college, Northwestern, studying business like Dad wanted." He stared into his whiskey. "I came home for winter break and the house was gone. Just ash and twisted metal where our life used to be." "What did the investigators say?" "Electrical fire. They claimed, started in Dad's study and spread fast. The whole house went up in less than an hour." His jaw tightened. "But Dad was obsessive about electrical safety. Had the whole place rewired just 2 years before. It never made sense to me." Aurora closed her eyes. And suddenly she was there, 7 years old, waking up to the smell of smoke and the sound of shouting. "I remember now," she whispered. "I woke up and the hallway was full of smoke. There was a man, not Dad, someone else. He was carrying me, but he smelled wrong. Like gasoline and fear." Adakus leaned forward sharply. "What man? What did he look like?" "I don't know. It's still fuzzy. But he put me in a car, and I was scared because I wanted Mom and Dad." Tears started flowing down her cheeks. He kept saying everything would be okay, that he was helping me, but I knew something was wrong. The next thing I remember clearly is waking up in a hospital in Abilene, and Maeve was there holding my hand. Jesus, Adakus breathed. Someone took you from the fire. Someone saved you but let everyone think you were dead. But why? Why would someone do that? Adakus stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his shoulders rigid with tension. Because someone didn't want you found. Someone who had a reason to want the Hawthorne family destroyed. The pieces were starting to form a picture that made Aurora's stomach turn. You think the fire wasn't an accident? I've thought that for 20 years, but I could never prove it. Dad's business partner, Silas Beaumont, he pushed hard for the electrical fire conclusion. Said it would be easier for everyone if we just accepted it and moved on. Adakus's reflection in the window looked haunted. 2 weeks after the funeral, he offered to buy Dad's shares in the company for a fraction of what they were worth. Said it was a generous gesture to help me through my grief. And you sold. I was 20 years old, Rory. I just lost my parents and my baby sister. I thought I had nothing left to fight for. He turned back to face her. Silas got control of Hawthorne Industries, and I got enough money to finish college and disappear for a while. By the time I came back and started building my own company, he'd sold off most of our family's land holdings. Aurora felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Chicago weather. The man who saved me from the fire. What if he was working for this Silas person? What if the plan was to kill all of us? But something went wrong. Or something went right. Adakus said grimly. Maybe whoever took you from that house had a conscience. Maybe they couldn't go through with murdering a 7-year-old. The implications hung in the air between them, like smoke from a fire that had never truly been extinguished. Aurora set down her whiskey glass with trembling hands. Do you think he knows I'm alive? This Silas. If he doesn't now, he will soon. Purchasing agreements are public record. When those papers get filed, showing that Aurora Whitfield sold her land to Adakus Hawthorne. He ran a hand through his hair. We need to be careful, Rory. If I'm right about what happened. If Silas was behind the fire, then you're living proof that he committed murder. Aurora stood up and walked to the photograph, picking it up with reverent hands. Looking at it now, she could see the resemblance clearly, not just in the little girl, but in all of them. She had her mother's smile, her father's stubborn chin, and Adakus's eyes, though his had grown harder with the years. What were they like? She asked softly. Our parents. A smile ghosted across Adakus's face, the first genuine one she'd seen from him. Dad was brilliant but absent-minded. He'd get so caught up in his work that Mom would have to remind him to eat dinner. And Mom, his voice grew tender. Mom could make anyone feel like the most important person in the world just by listening to them. She used to read to you every night. Remember, you'd insist on the same story for weeks at a time. The Princess and the Dragon, Aurora whispered, the memory surfacing clear and bright. But in our version, the princess saved herself. You always said regular fairy tales were boring because the princesses never got to do anything cool. Adakus laughed, and the sound transformed his entire face. You were going to be a knight when you grew up, not a princess. You had it all planned out. More memories were flooding back now, each one a small miracle. Family dinners around a huge oak table. Christmas mornings with presents piled so high she couldn't see over them. Her father teaching her to play chess, letting her win just often enough to keep her interested. Her mother braiding her hair and singing songs in a voice like honey. They loved us, she said, and it wasn't a question. Completely, unconditionally. They would have moved heaven and earth to protect us. Adakus's expression darkened, which is why I know Dad didn't just let himself and Mom die in an electrical fire. He would have fought to get to you, would have made sure you were safe before worrying about anything else. Aurora touched her scar again, but this time the gesture felt different. Not nervous or unconscious, but deliberate. Maeve used to say this scar proved I was a survivor. She had no idea how right she was. We're both survivors, Rory. We just survived different things. She looked at her brother. God, she had a brother, and saw the weight he'd been carrying for 20 years. The guilt of being away when his family died. The responsibility of being the sole heir to a legacy that had been stolen from him. The loneliness of believing he was the last Hawthorne standing. What happens now? She asked. Now we figure out how to prove what really happened that night, and we make sure Silas Beaumont pays for what he took from us. Adakus's voice was hard as steel. "But first, we need to keep you safe. If I'm right about Silas, and if he realizes you're alive, he'll try to finish what he started 20 years ago." "Exactly. Which means we need to be smart about this. We can't just go charging in with accusations we can't prove." Aurora nodded, understanding the gravity of their situation. She'd thought coming to Chicago would be about signing papers and starting over somewhere new. Instead, she'd found a family she'd lost, and discovered that her entire life had been built on a lie designed to protect her from a murderer. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Maeve, she never told me the truth about where I came from, but she must have known something. People don't just find 7-year-olds wandering country roads and not ask questions." "Then we start there," Adakus said. "We find out what Maeve knew and who told her to keep quiet. We piece together what really happened that night, step by step." Aurora looked out the window at the sprawling city below, thinking about the small farmhouse in Texas that had been her sanctuary for 20 years. Maeve had given her love, safety, and a chance at a normal life, but now she wondered if that safety had come at the cost of justice for her murdered parents. "I want to go back to Texas," she said. "I want to see if there are any answers hidden in Maeve's things, and I want to visit the place where our house used to stand." Adakus nodded. "We'll go together. It's time to go home, Rory. Time to face whatever truth is buried in that Texas soil." As they began making plans, neither of them noticed the man in the expensive suit watching from the building across the street, his phone already dialing a number he'd hoped never to use again. Silas Beaumont's voice was calm when he answered, but the man could hear the underlying tension. "Sir, we have a problem. Aurora Hawthorne is alive, and she's found her brother." The flight back to Texas felt like traveling through time. Aurora pressed her face to the small airplane window, watching Chicago's skyline shrink until it disappeared beneath a blanket of clouds. Beside her, Adakus sat rigid in his first-class seat, his jaw clenched as he stared at a folder full of documents he'd pulled from his company's archives. "What did you find?" Aurora asked, nodding toward the papers. "Old contracts, property deeds, partnership agreements between Dad and Silas." Adakus's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Look at this." He handed her a yellowed document dated 6 months before the fire. Silas had been pressuring Dad to sell the East Texas properties for over a year, said there were rumors about oil deposits, that they could make a fortune if they acted fast. Aurora scanned the contract, her heart sinking as she read, but Dad refused. More than refused. He wrote a letter to Silas saying he'd never sell land that had been in our family for 3 generations, said some things were more important than money. Adakus's laugh was bitter. Dad always was an idealist. So Silas decided to take what he couldn't buy. That's what I think. With Mom and Dad dead and you presumed dead, I was the only heir and I was young, grieving, overwhelmed, easy to manipulate. The plane began its descent into Dallas, and Aurora's stomach clenched with nerves that had nothing to do with flying. She was about to return to the place where her life had been torn apart, where someone had tried to erase her existence entirely. But she was also going home to find answers that had been buried for 20 years. They rented a car at the airport and drove the 2 hours to Abilene in relative silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The Texas landscape looked different to Aurora now. Not like the only world she'd ever known, but like a place where she'd been hidden away. The rolling hills and endless sky that had once comforted her now felt vast and isolating. The Whitfield farm looked smaller than she remembered, more fragile under the weight of the drought and her absence. Weeds had already begun to reclaim the garden, and the house had the hollow, abandoned look of a place where life had stopped. "This is where you grew up," Adakus said as they pulled into the gravel driveway. "It's where I survived," Aurora corrected. "I grew up in the first 7 years of my life, in a house with you and our parents." Inside, the farmhouse felt like a museum of her false life. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The bills still stacked on the kitchen table, Maeve's coffee cup still sitting by the sink, the family photos on the mantel showing 20 years of a life built on a necessary lie. Aurora led Adakus to Maeve's bedroom and pulled out the wooden chest from under the bed. "This is everything she left me about my past. I've been through it 100 times, but maybe fresh eyes will see something I missed." They spread the documents across Maeve's quilt, adoption papers, medical records, a few newspaper clippings about the fire that had supposedly killed the entire Hawthorne family. But as they examined each piece of paper more carefully, inconsistencies began to emerge. "Look at this," Adakus said, holding up the medical report from when Aurora had first arrived at the hospital in Abilene. "It says you were brought in by a good Samaritan who wished to remain anonymous. But someone had to give them information about your injuries, your approximate age. And look at the adoption papers," Aurora added. "They're dated 6 months after the fire, but there's no record of you being in state custody during that time. How does a 7-year-old just disappear from the system for 6 months? Someone was pulling strings behind the scenes," Adakus said grimly. "Someone with enough influence to make paperwork disappear and reappear when it was convenient. They found more clues hidden in a manila envelope at the bottom of the chest. Bank statements showing regular deposits into Maeve's account starting the month after Aurora's adoption. Small amounts, nothing that would draw attention, but consistent payments that had continued for 15 years. "Hush money," Adakus said. "Someone was paying Maeve to keep quiet and keep you hidden." Aurora's hands trembled as she stared at the bank statements. But who? And why did the payments stop 5 years ago? Maybe whoever was paying thought the danger had passed, or maybe... Adakus paused, a terrible thought crossing his face. Maybe they stopped because they thought you'd never find out the truth. They decided to visit the cemetery where Maeve was buried, hoping to find some peace or clarity among the headstones. The Abilene cemetery was small and peaceful, shaded by old oak trees that provided relief from the relentless Texas sun. Maeve's grave was marked by a simple granite stone. Maeve Whitfield, beloved mother and friend. "She loved you," Adakus said quietly, as Aurora knelt to place fresh flowers on the grave. "I know. That's what makes this so hard." Tears streamed down Aurora's face. "She gave me everything. Love, safety, a home. But she also kept me from knowing who I really was. From knowing I had a brother who was looking for me. She was protecting you the only way she knew how. But from what? Or from who?" The sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn. An elderly man with a walking cane was making his way toward them. His weathered face creased with concern. "Excuse me," he called out. "Are you Aurora? Maeve's girl?" Aurora stood up, wiping her eyes. "Yes, sir, I'm Aurora." "Thought so. You look just like her, you know, Maeve. I mean, when she was your age." The old man extended his hand. "I'm Harold Thompson. I was Maeve's neighbor for 30 years. Mr. Thompson, it's nice to meet you. This is Adakus." Harold's eyes sharpened as he looked at Adakus, and Aurora could swear she saw recognition flicker across his face. "Hawthorne?" he asked quietly. The siblings exchanged glances. "You know that name?" Adakus asked. Harold looked around the cemetery as if checking for eavesdroppers, then lowered his voice. "Maeve told me, near the end. She was worried about what would happen to Aurora when she was gone. Worried about secrets she'd kept too long." Aurora's heart raced. "What secrets?" "She made me promise not to tell, unless something happened to you. Unless you were in danger." Harold studied their faces carefully. "But seeing you two together, knowing who you must be, I think that time has come." He led them to a bench beneath a sprawling pecan tree, his movements slow and deliberate. "The night Maeve found you, Aurora. It wasn't on some random country road like the papers said. A man brought you to her house, carried you right up to her front door." "What man?" Adakus demanded. "Never got his name, but I saw him from my kitchen window. Middle-aged fellow, expensive suit, driving a car that cost more than most folks make in a year. He was crying when he handed you over to Maeve, shaking like a leaf." Aurora gripped the bench so hard her knuckles went white. "Did you hear what he said to her?" "Some of it. He kept saying he was sorry, that he never meant for things to go so far. Said people would come looking for you eventually, and that Maeve had to keep you safe and keep you hidden until it was safe." "And she agreed." Harold nodded. Maeve had just lost her own daughter in a car accident 6 months earlier. She was grieving something fierce, and here was this little girl who needed a mother. But she made the man promise to send money for your care, and to let her know when it was safe to tell you the truth. But he never did, Adakus said. He never said it was safe. The money stopped coming about 5 years ago, around the same time Maeve started getting sick. She was worried that whoever had been paying was either dead or had forgotten about you, She was scared about what would happen if the wrong people found out you were alive. Aurora felt the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. The man who brought me to Maeve, he was working for someone else. Someone who ordered the fire but couldn't bring himself to kill a child. Or someone who realized that murdering a 7-year-old would bring too much attention. Adakus added grimly. Harold reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope. Maeve gave me this before she died. Said to give it to you if anyone named Hawthorne ever came looking. With shaking hands, Aurora opened the envelope and unfolded a letter written in Maeve's careful handwriting. As she read, her face went pale. "What does it say?" Adakus asked. Aurora's voice was barely a whisper. She knew our parents were murdered, knew who was responsible, and she knew why I had to stay hidden. She looked up at her brother, her eyes wide with fear. "Adakus, we're not just dealing with someone who killed our parents 20 years ago. We're dealing with someone who's been watching us this whole time. Someone who has the power to make people disappear." "Who?" Adakus demanded. "Who is it, Rory?" Aurora held up the letter, her hand trembling. "Senator Silas Beaumont. And according to Maeve, he knows I'm alive." 300 miles away in Austin, Senator Silas Beaumont stood in his mahogany-paneled office, staring at the surveillance photos spread across his desk like tarot cards predicting doom. 20 years of careful planning, 20 years of believing the Hawthorne problem was buried with their parents' ashes. And now these images mocked him with their impossible truth. Aurora Hawthorne was alive. Not only alive, but she'd found her brother. The photos showed them together at the Chicago airport, in the rental car driving through Texas, standing side by side at Maeve Whitfield's grave. In one particularly damning shot, they were talking to that meddlesome old neighbor, Harold Thompson, who'd been a thorn in Silas's side for years. "How long have you known?" Silas asked without turning around. His chief of staff, Marcus Webb, shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair behind him. The surveillance team spotted them yesterday afternoon. They've been watching the Whitfield property since we got word about the land sale. "Yesterday afternoon," Silas repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "And you're telling me now because we wanted to be absolutely certain before we brought this to your attention." "Senator, the resemblance could have been coincidental." "Could have been." Silas spun around, his face flushed with rage. "Look at those photos, Marcus. Look at her face. She's the spitting image of Catherine Hawthorne at that age. There's no coincidence here." Marcus had worked for Silas for 15 years, had helped cover up bribes, election fraud, and worse, but he'd never seen his boss this rattled. "What do you want me to do?" Silas walked to the window overlooking the Texas state capitol grounds, his hands clasped behind his back. At 62, he'd built an empire on the foundation of that long-ago night when everything had gone wrong. The Hawthorne fortune had been the seed money for his political career. The oil rights from their land had funded his campaigns, and the elimination of his business partners had given him the power he'd craved. But he'd made one crucial mistake 20 years ago, and now it was coming back to destroy him. "Tell me about the man who was supposed to handle the girl," Silas said quietly. Marcus consulted his tablet. "Thomas Crane. He was your campaign finance director back then. Remember, you trusted him to tie up loose ends after the fire. And instead of killing a 7-year-old like he was paid to do, he developed a conscience." Silas's laugh was bitter. "I should have known better than to trust a job like that to someone with a family of his own. He's been dead for 5 years. Senator, heart attack, natural causes. How convenient. And the old woman, Maeve Whitfield, also dead. Cancer, 6 months ago. But she left papers. Senator, letters, and she talked to people before she died." Silas felt the walls closing in around him. 20 years ago, he'd been a small-time state legislator with big dreams and bigger debts. The Hawthorne family had owned the most valuable land in East Texas, sitting on oil deposits worth hundreds of millions, when Richard Hawthorne had refused to sell. Silas had seen only one option. The fire was supposed to look like an accident. The whole family was supposed to die. Silas would buy the property from the estate for a fraction of its value, claim it was a gesture of friendship to help young Adakus through his grief. Clean, simple, profitable. But Thomas Crane had lost his nerve when it came to the little girl. Instead of finishing the job, he'd spirited her away to some backwater town, paid an old woman to keep her hidden, and sworn it was just temporary. "Until things cool down," he'd said. "Until we can figure out another way." There had never been another way. There had only been 20 years of watching Adakus Hawthorne build his own empire. 20 years of hoping the girl would never remember, never ask questions, never surface to threaten everything Silas had built on the bones of her family. "What's our exposure?" Silas asked. Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Significant. If they can prove you were behind the fire, we're looking at murder charges. And if Aurora Hawthorne remembers anything about that night, she was 7 years old and traumatized. What could she possibly remember?" Enough, apparently. Our source at the rental car company says they drove out to the old Hawthorne property yesterday evening. They spent 2 hours walking around the ruins. Silas closed his eyes, remembering the magnificent house that had once stood on those acres. Georgian colonial with white columns and wraparound porches, surrounded by gardens that Catherine Hawthorne had tended with her own hands. He'd visited there many times as Richard's business partner, had admired the wealth and stability it represented. Now it was nothing but a blackened foundation overgrown with weeds, a monument to his own ambition. "They're building a case," Silas said. "Piece by piece. They're putting together what really happened that night." "What do you want me to do?" Marcus asked again. Silas turned away from the window and fixed his chief of staff with a cold stare. "I want you to remind them that I'm not the same desperate small-town politician I was 20 years ago. I'm a United States senator with friends in very high places. I have resources they can't imagine and reach they can't escape. You want me to threaten them. I want you to make them understand that some secrets are too dangerous to reveal, that some truths are better left buried." Marcus nodded and stood to leave, but Silas's voice stopped him at the door. "And Marcus, if they don't listen to reason, well, history has a way of repeating itself, doesn't it?" Back in Abilene, Aurora and Adakus sat in the dim light of the farmhouse kitchen. Maeve's letter spread out between them like a roadmap to hell. The elegant handwriting detailed everything. Thomas Crane's late-night visit, his tearful confession about the fire, the monthly payments that had sustained Aurora's hidden life. "She protected me for 20 years, Aurora said, her voice hollow. "She knew that if Silas ever found out I was alive, he'd finish what he started." Adakus paced the small kitchen like a caged animal. "We have to go to the police. We have evidence now. Maeve's letter, the bank records, Harold's testimony." "Evidence of what?" "A story told by a dead woman about events from 20 years ago." Aurora shook her head. "Silas is a use, Senator, Adakus. He has lawyers, influence, connections. What do we have?" "We have the truth. The truth isn't always enough." Adakus's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Mr. Hawthorne." The voice was smooth, professional, with just a hint of menace. "This is Marcus Webb, Chief of Staff to Senator Beaumont. The senator would like to speak with you and your sister." Aurora went pale as Adakus put the call on speaker. "What about?" "I think you know what about, Mr. Hawthorne. There are some conversations that are better had in person, don't you think? Some misunderstandings that need to be cleared up before they cause unnecessary trouble for everyone involved." "Is that a threat?" Marcus chuckled. "It's an invitation. The senator is hosting a private fundraiser tomorrow evening at his ranch outside Austin. He'd very much like you both to attend as his guests. And if we refuse, then I suppose you'll have to live with the consequences of that decision. Both of you." The line went dead, leaving Aurora and Adakus staring at each other across the kitchen table. "He knows," Aurora whispered. "He knows we know. And now he's calling us out." Adakus's jaw was set with determination. "He thinks he can intimidate us into silence." "Can't he? You said it yourself. He's a senator with resources we can't match." "Maybe. But he's also a man who's been living with this secret for 20 years. He's as trapped by what happened as we are." Adakus reached across the table and took her hand. "We can't run, Rory. We can't hide. Our parents deserve justice, and this might be our only chance to get it." Aurora looked around the kitchen that had been her sanctuary, thinking about the life Maeve had built for her on a foundation of necessary lies. Outside, the Texas wind howled through the drought-stricken fields, carrying the scent of dust and dying dreams. "Okay," she said finally. "We go to Austin. We face him. Together. Together." Neither of them noticed the black sedan parked on the county road half a mile away. or the telephoto lens capturing their every move. In Austin, Senator Silas Beaumont studied the latest photos with grim satisfaction. The Hawthorne siblings were walking into his trap with their eyes wide open. Tomorrow night, one way or another, the last loose ends from that long-ago fire would finally be tied up for good. The drive to Austin should have taken 3 hours, but Aurora insisted they stop at the ruins of their childhood home first. As their rental car crunched over the gravel road that had once led to the grand Hawthorne estate, she felt her chest tighten with a mixture of anticipation and dread. "Are you sure about this?" Adakus asked, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. "I need to see it. I need to remember." Aurora touched her scar, feeling the familiar raised line beneath her fingertips. "If we're going to face Silas tonight, I need to know everything about what happened." The foundation was all that remained of what had once been a magnificent home. Blackened concrete blocks outlined rooms that had held a lifetime of memories, now overgrown with Texas wildflowers and stubborn weeds that had pushed through cracks in the stone. A rusted swing set stood in what had been the backyard, its chains creaking mournfully in the afternoon breeze. Aurora walked carefully through the ruins, her boots crunching on debris that time and weather hadn't managed to wash away, as she stepped into what must have been the main hallway. A wave of memory hit her so powerfully that she staggered. 7-year-old Rory running down this same hallway, her bare feet slapping against polished hardwood floors, the smell of her mother's baking bread wafting from the kitchen, her father's voice calling from his study. "Rory, come see what I found in the garden." "I remember the grandfather clock," she whispered, pointing to an empty corner. "It chimed every hour, and I used to count the bells. It played a melody at noon, something classical that Mom would hum along with." Adakus nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Beethoven's Ode to Joy. Dad had it specially made for Mom's birthday." They moved deeper into the ruins, each step unlocking more fragments of the past. Aurora could see the rooms as they had been. The library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the formal dining room where they'd eaten Sunday dinners, the sunroom where her mother had kept her prize orchids. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to a section of foundation near what had been the back of the house. "That was my room." She knelt beside the concrete, running her hands over the rough surface. In her mind, she could see pink wallpaper with dancing ballerinas, a canopy bed with white lace curtains, shelves lined with stuffed animals and picture books. "You had a dollhouse," Adakus said quietly, kneeling beside her. "Dad spent 3 months building it for your 6th birthday. It was an exact replica of this house, complete with tiny furniture and little people that looked like our family." "I remember." The memory burst forth with startling clarity. "I used to act out stories with the dolls. The little girl doll was always going on adventures, and the big brother doll would come rescue her when she got in trouble." They sat together in the ruins of their childhood bedroom, and Aurora felt more memories surfacing like bubbles in a deep pond. Her mother reading bedtime stories, doing different voices for all the characters. Her father teaching her to identify constellations from the bedroom window. Adakus sneaking her cookies before dinner, making her promise not to tell. "I was happy here," she said wonderingly. "We all were. Completely happy," Adakus confirmed. "Even when Mom and Dad argued about business or money, this house was full of love. It was our sanctuary." Aurora stood and walked toward the area that would have been her parents' bedroom. As she approached the far corner of the foundation, another memory slammed into her, this one dark and terrifying. Smoke in the hallway, the acrid smell of burning wood and something else, something chemical and wrong, shouting voices that didn't belong, being lifted by strong arms that smelled like gasoline and fear. "Adakus," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I remember more about that night." He was beside her instantly, his hand on her shoulder. "What do you remember?" "There were 2 men. The one who carried me out. He was younger, scared. He kept saying, 'I can't do this. I can't do this,' over and over." Aurora closed her eyes, forcing herself to relive the nightmare. But there was another voice, older, colder. He said, "It has to be done. All of them. Did you see their faces?" Not clearly, but the older voice. "I've heard it since recently." Aurora's eyes snapped open. "On the phone yesterday, Marcus Webb. He works for Silas." Adakus cursed under his breath. So Silas was here that night. He didn't just order the fire. He was here to make sure it was done right. But something went wrong. The younger man, he couldn't kill a child, so he took me instead. Thomas Crane, Adakus said grimly. According to Maeve's letter, he was the one who brought you to her. He must have been Silas's muscle back then. Aurora walked to the spot where her parents' bedroom had been. Kneeling again beside the foundation, another wave of memory washed over her. This one so vivid and horrible that she gasped. Her parents' door was closed, but she could hear them arguing with someone inside. Her father's voice, angry and frightened. "You're insane, Silas. I'll never sell. Not to you, not to anyone." Her mother screaming. A gunshot, then another. "They didn't die in the fire," Aurora said, her voice hollow with shock. "Silas shot them first. The fire was just to cover it up." Adakus's face went white. "Are you sure?" "I heard the gunshots. I heard Mom scream." Tears streamed down Aurora's face. "Then someone grabbed me from behind. I tried to fight, but I was so small. The man carrying me was crying. He kept saying he was sorry, that he never meant for anyone to get hurt." "Jesus," Adakus breathed. "No wonder Silas has been so desperate to keep this quiet. It's not just about property fraud, or even accidental deaths. It's cold-blooded murder. They stood together in the ruins of their family's life, the weight of recovered memory settling over them like a shroud." Aurora felt raw, exposed, as if 20 years of protective numbness had been stripped away in a single afternoon. But she also felt something else, a burning need for justice that matched the intensity of her grief. "We have to stop him," she said. "Not just for us, but for them, for Mom and Dad. And we will, but we have to be smart about it. Silas has had 20 years to cover his tracks, to build his defenses. If we go in unprepared tonight, he'll kill us too," Aurora finished. "Just like he killed them." They spent another hour walking through the ruins, Aurora's recovered memories filling in more details about that horrible night. She remembered being driven for hours in a car that smelled like leather and fear. She remembered Thomas Crane crying as he carried her to Maeve's front door, whispering apologies she was too young to understand. Most importantly, she remembered seeing Silas Beaumont's face in the firelight as he watched their house burn. Even at 7, she'd recognized the expression of a man who'd gotten exactly what he wanted as they drove toward Austin for their confrontation with the man who'd destroyed their family. Aurora felt the last pieces of her identity clicking into place. She wasn't just Aurora Whitfield, the orphaned farm girl who'd lost everything to drought and debt. She was Aurora Hawthorne, daughter of Richard and Catherine, sister to Adakus, survivor of a massacre that had been designed to erase her entire bloodline. "I'm not afraid of him anymore," she told Adakus as the Austin skyline came into view. "I remember who I was before he tried to destroy me. I remember what we lost. And what we're fighting to get back," Adakus added. "Justice, truth, and maybe, if we're lucky, some kind of peace." The sun was setting behind them as they entered the city, painting the sky the color of fire. Aurora touched her scar one more time. But now the gesture felt like a promise, rather than a nervous habit. She'd survived Silas Beaumont's first attempt to silence her. Tonight, she'd make sure it was his last. The Beaumont Ranch sprawled across 500 acres of prime Texas hill country, its main house rising from manicured grounds like a monument to political power and old money. As Aurora and Adakus approached the circular drive in their rental car, they could see dozens of luxury vehicles already parked near the imposing entrance. BMWs, Mercedes, and Bentleys belonging to Austin's elite. "Second thoughts?" Adakus asked. Adjusting his tie, they'd stopped at a men's store in Austin to buy appropriate clothes for the fundraiser, knowing they needed to blend in with the crowd. "Too late for those," Aurora replied, smoothing down her black cocktail dress. The elegant outfit felt like armor, transforming her from a struggling farm girl into someone who belonged among the wealthy and powerful. Besides, we're not backing down now. Chinese lanterns hung from the oak trees lining the drive, casting a warm glow over guests who mingled on the expansive lawn with champagne glasses and practiced smiles. A string quartet played near the pool, and waiters in crisp uniforms circulated with silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. It was the picture of refined Texas hospitality, but Aurora could feel the undercurrent of danger thrumming beneath the polished surface. "Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne," a young woman with a clipboard greeted them at the entrance. Senator Beaumont has been expecting you. He asked me to escort you to him personally once you arrived. Aurora and Adakus exchanged glances. They hadn't given their names, which meant they'd been identified before they'd even left their car. The level of surveillance and control made Aurora's skin crawl, but she forced herself to smile graciously. "How thoughtful of the senator," she said. They followed their escort through crowds of Texas's political and business elite. Past conversations about oil futures and upcoming elections, Aurora recognized several faces from news broadcasts. A federal judge, the mayor of Austin, a prominent oil executive who'd been in the headlines for his environmental controversies. "He's got quite a network," Adakus murmured. "And they're all here," Aurora observed, "witnesses to whatever he's planning." The escort led them through French doors into the main house, down a hallway lined with oil paintings of previous generations of Beaumonts. The artwork seemed to follow their progress with painted eyes, and Aurora couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking deeper into a carefully constructed trap. Senator Silas Beaumont stood in his private study, a glass of bourbon in his hand, and 20 years of carefully maintained composure on his face. At 62, he was still an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of commanding presence that had carried him from small-town lawyer to the halls of Congress. But Aurora could see something else in his pale blue eyes, the calculating coldness of a man who'd built his empire on the bones of her family. "Aurora," he said, setting down his drink and approaching her with arms outstretched as if greeting an old friend. "My God, you look exactly like your mother at that age. Catherine was one of the most beautiful women I ever knew." Aurora forced herself not to recoil from his touch as he kissed her cheek in a gesture of false familiarity. "Senator Beaumont, thank you for inviting us. Please, call me Silas after all. We're practically family. Your father and I were partners for so many years." His smile was perfect. Politician practiced, but it never reached his eyes. "Adakus, you've grown into quite the businessman yourself. Your father would be proud." "Would he?" Adakus's voice was carefully neutral, given how things ended between you two. Silas's smile flickered for just a moment, before reasserting itself. "Business disagreements? Nothing more. Richard was always idealistic about the land, sentimental about keeping everything in the family. I understood his position, even if I didn't agree with it. Understood it enough to kill him for it," Aurora said quietly. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Silas's genial mask slipped completely, revealing the predator beneath. He moved to close the study door, then activated what appeared to be a white noise machine on his desk. "Privacy," he explained with a cold smile. "In my line of work, one can never be too careful about eavesdroppers." "So you're admitting it," Adakus said. "I'm not admitting anything. I'm simply ensuring that whatever we discuss tonight stays between us." Silas returned to his desk, pouring himself another bourbon with steady hands. "Would either of you care for a drink? We have a lot to talk about." "We know what you did," Aurora said, her voice gaining strength. "We know you murdered our parents and tried to kill me. We know you've spent 20 years building your career on the foundation of their deaths." Silas studied her over the rim of his glass. "And what exactly do you think you know?" "My dear, I remember that night. I remember hearing the gunshots. I remember you standing in the firelight, watching our house burn. The memories of a traumatized 7-year-old, 20 years after the fact." Silas laughed. "I don't think any prosecutor would find that particularly compelling evidence." "What about Maeve's letter?" Adakus demanded. "She documented everything. Thomas Crane's confession, the payments you made to keep Aurora hidden. Poor Thomas. He always was weak. And as for Maeve Whitfield's letter," Silas opened a desk drawer and pulled out a familiar piece of paper. "You mean this one?" Aurora's blood ran cold as she recognized Maeve's handwriting. "How did you get that?" "I've been having your activities monitored since the moment you two found each other. My people retrieved it from the old neighbor's house last night. Harold Thompson won't be telling any more stories about the past." "What did you do to him?" Aurora whispered. "Nothing dramatic. A simple heart attack, brought on by the stress of someone breaking into his house. These things happen to elderly gentlemen. Very sad." Adakus lunged forward, but Silas raised a hand that stopped him cold. 2 men in expensive suits had appeared from hidden doorways, their hands resting on concealed weapons. "Please, "Let's remain civilized," Silas said. "We're all adults here. We can discuss this rationally." Aurora felt the walls closing in around them. Silas had anticipated their every move, eliminated their evidence, silenced their witnesses. They'd walked into his trap exactly as he'd planned. "What do you want?" she asked. "What I've always wanted. To protect what I've built, you see. Children. 20 years ago, I made a difficult decision. Your father was going to destroy everything with his stubborn refusal to adapt to changing times. The land, the oil rights, the future of East Texas. He would have let it all stagnate rather than embrace progress. So you killed him for it. I removed an obstacle to prosperity. The fire was regrettable but necessary. And you, my dear Aurora, were supposed to have died with your parents." Thomas's moment of weakness complicated things considerably. Silas walked to the window overlooking his manicured grounds, where his fundraiser guests continued their elegant socializing, oblivious to the deadly conversation taking place inside. "For 20 years, I've wondered when this moment would come, when you would surface, when you would remember, when you would seek your misguided version of justice." He turned back to face them. "But you see, I'm not the desperate small-town politician I was back then. I have resources now, influence, protection. And we have the truth," Aurora said. "Truth is a luxury, my dear. And luxuries are for people who can afford them." Silas returned to his desk and pressed a button on his phone. "Marcus, please join us." Marcus Webb entered the study, his expression coldly professional. "Senator, Mr. Webb has been instrumental in helping me manage various complications over the years. He's very good at solving problems that require creative solutions." Aurora's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized the full extent of their danger. They weren't just facing a corrupt politician. They were trapped in the den of a man who'd spent 2 decades perfecting the art of making inconvenient people disappear. "You can't just kill us," Adakus said. "We're not 7-year-olds wandering around in the dark. People know where we are." "Do they? You told no one about this meeting. You came here of your own free will, as my guests. And later tonight, when the party is over and the guests have gone home, there will unfortunately be a terrible accident. A gas leak in the guest house where you were staying. Perhaps, or a car crash on the dangerous country roads around here." Silas's smile was genuinely regretful. Such a tragedy, losing the last of the Hawthorne family after all these years. Aurora looked at her brother and saw her own desperate determination reflected in his eyes. They'd found each other after 20 years of separation, discovered the truth about their past, and now they were about to lose everything again, to the same man who'd destroyed their family the first time. But as Silas savored his moment of triumph, Aurora noticed something he'd missed in his arrogance. Her phone, still in her purse, was recording. She'd started the app when they first entered the study, and every word of his confession was being captured. Now she just had to figure out how to stay alive long enough to use it. The tension in Silas's study was thick enough to cut with a knife. Aurora's phone continued recording in her purse while she tried to keep her expression neutral, desperately hoping that Silas wouldn't notice the small device that might be their only chance at justice. "You seem remarkably calm for someone in your position," Silas observed, studying Aurora's face with the calculating gaze of a predator. "Most people would be begging for their lives by now." "Maybe I'm not most people," Aurora replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "After all, I did survive your first attempt to kill me, a mistake I don't intend to repeat." Marcus Webb moved closer to the siblings, his hand hovering near his jacket. "Senator, perhaps we should move this conversation to a more private location." The guests are exactly where I want them," Silas interrupted. 200 of Texas's most influential citizens, all providing me with the perfect alibi for whatever unfortunate events occur later tonight. Adakus shifted slightly, positioning himself between Aurora and Marcus. "You really think you can just make us disappear in the age of social media and GPS tracking? My dear boy, you'd be amazed what money and political influence can accomplish. Missing persons cases go cold all the time, especially when the investigating officers are convinced that the subjects simply decided to start new lives elsewhere." The study door opened, and a young woman in catering attire entered with a silver tray. "Excuse me, Senator, but you asked me to bring refreshments for your guests." Silas's eyes flashed with annoyance. "I said no interruptions." "I'm sorry, sir, but the kitchen manager insisted." Aurora caught something in the young woman's eyes, a flicker of recognition, a subtle nod that seemed directed at her. The caterer set down the tray and began arranging glasses with deliberate slowness, her movements calculated to buy time. "That will be all," Marcus said sharply, moving toward the door. But the caterer wasn't finished. As she reached for the last glass, she knocked over a small vase of flowers, sending water cascading across Silas's desk and onto his expensive papers. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, rushing to grab napkins while chaos erupted around Silas's desk. In the confusion, Aurora felt her phone buzz with an incoming text message. She glanced down discreetly and saw a message from an unknown number. "Help is coming. Keep him talking. JF. JF." Aurora's mind raced, trying to place the initials. Then it hit her. Jennifer Flores, the investigative journalist who'd been trying to reach her for weeks about the Hawthorne Industries land purchases. Someone must have alerted her to their situation. "Enough!" Silas roared, his composure finally cracking. "Get out! All of you get out except my guest here." The caterer scurried away, but not before shooting Aurora one last meaningful look. Marcus closed the door firmly behind her and reactivated the white noise machine. "Now then," Silas said, attempting to regain his control while dabbing water from his ruined papers. "Where were we?" "You were telling us how you planned to murder us and make it look like an accident," Aurora said, her newfound confidence growing. "Please, continue. I'm fascinated by how a United States senator justifies cold-blooded killing." "Justify?" Silas laughed bitterly. "My dear girl, I don't need to justify anything. I built an empire from nothing, brought prosperity to thousands of people, created jobs and opportunities that your father's sentimental attachment to the land could never have achieved, by murdering innocent people, by making hard choices that weaker men couldn't make." Silas's voice took on the passionate cadence of a campaign speech. "Do you know what East Texas looked like before I unlocked the value of that land? Dying farms, empty towns, young people fleeing to the cities because there was no future here? I changed all that. With blood money," Adakus said, "with vision and courage. Your parents were obstacles to progress, just like you are now." Silas walked to a wall safe hidden behind a painting and began working the combination. "But unlike 20 years ago, I'm prepared for this contingency." He pulled out a thick folder of documents and photographs. Spreading them across the desk, Aurora's blood chilled as she recognized surveillance photos of herself at the farm, at the cemetery, walking through the ruins of their childhood home. "I've been watching you both for months," Silas continued, "ever since Adakus started his land-buying spree in East Texas. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the patterns? The systematic acquisition of properties that had once belonged to my former business partners? You've been planning this," Aurora realized. "Planning, preparing, anticipating. I've survived in politics for 30 years by being 3 steps ahead of my enemies." Silas pulled out another document, a detailed dossier on Aurora's life with Maeve. "I know everything about your life in hiding, my dear. Every teacher, every friend, every doctor's appointment. I even know about that little scar on your forehead and how you touch it when you're nervous." Aurora forced her hand to remain still despite the instinctive urge to touch the mark. "The question," Silas continued, "is whether you're going to force me to take the same drastic measures I took 20 years ago, or whether we can come to some sort of arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Adakus asked, though his voice suggested he already knew he wouldn't like the answer. "You disappear, quietly, voluntarily, change your names, move to another country, start new lives far away from Texas and far away from me. In exchange, I provide you with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your lives. And if we refuse," Silas's smile was arctic, "then you'll join your parents in the family plot, and the world will mourn the tragic end of the Hawthorne bloodline." Aurora's phone buzzed again. Another text. "Keep recording. Federal agents en route. 10 minutes. Federal agents." Aurora's pulse quickened. Someone had taken their situation seriously enough to involve the FBI, but 10 minutes might as well be 10 hours given their current circumstances. "You're assuming we came here unprepared," she said, taking a calculated risk. "That we walked into your trap without any backup plan." For the first time since they'd entered the study, uncertainty flickered across Silas's face. "What backup plan?" Did you really think we'd confront a United States senator without insurance? Without making sure that if something happened to us, the truth would come out anyway? It was a bluff, but Aurora could see it was working. Silas's eyes darted between them, his politician's instincts warning him that he might have miscalculated. "You're lying," Marcus said. "We've been monitoring their communications. They made no arrangements." "That you know of?" Adakus interrupted, picking up on Aurora's strategy. "Tell me, Silas, how did it feel to kill our parents? Did you pull the trigger yourself, or did you have someone else do your dirty work?" "I did what was necessary," Silas snapped, but his composure was cracking. "So you admit you murdered them?" "I admit nothing. You have no proof, no evidence, no witnesses." Aurora smiled, thinking of the recording device in her purse. "Don't we?" The sound of vehicles approaching at high speed drifted through the windows. Silas rushed to look outside and cursed fluently as he saw black SUVs with federal license plates racing up his circular drive. "How?" he demanded, whirling to face them. "Insurance," Aurora said simply. "The kind you don't buy with money or political influence." Marcus reached for his weapon, but the study door burst open before he could clear his holster. Federal agents in tactical gear swarmed into the room, weapons drawn and voices shouting commands. "FBI, nobody move, hands where we can see them." In the chaos that followed, Aurora clutched her purse tightly, protecting the recording that contained Silas's confession. Outside, she could hear the shocked voices of fundraiser guests as they realized their elegant evening had become a federal crime scene. Senator Silas Beaumont, builder of empires and destroyer of families, stood in the center of his own study with his hands raised in surrender, 20 years of carefully constructed lies finally collapsing around him like a house of cards in a Texas windstorm. But even as the federal agents took control of the situation, Aurora knew the real confrontation was just beginning. Silas had powerful friends, expensive lawyers, and decades of political favors to call in. The war for justice was far from over. The FBI raid at the Beaumont Ranch made national headlines within hours. Aurora and Adakus found themselves in protective custody at a federal safe house outside Austin, watching news coverage of their own story, while agents debriefed them about the evening's events. The recording from Aurora's phone played on repeat in the background as prosecutors prepared their case. "We've got him," Agent Jennifer Flores said, setting down a cup of coffee in front of Aurora. "That recording is a prosecutor's dream. A full confession to murder, conspiracy, and 20 years of cover-up." Aurora recognized her now as the caterer who had caused the distraction in Silas's study. "You've been investigating him for a while, haven't you?" 3 years, ever since a whistleblower came forward with evidence of campaign finance irregularities tied to his land acquisitions. But we could never make the bigger connections until you two surfaced. Jennifer pulled out a thick file. "Your story filled in all the missing pieces. What happens now?" Adakus asked. "Now we build an airtight case. But I have to warn you, Silas isn't going down without a fight. He's already retained the best defense attorneys money can buy, and he's calling in every political favor he's accumulated over 3 decades, as if summoned by her words." Agent Flores's phone rang. She answered with a frown that deepened as she listened. "I understand. Yes, sir. We'll be ready." She hung up and turned to the siblings with grim expression. "Silas made bail an hour ago. Federal judge in Houston. Apparently an old friend of his. He's free." Aurora felt ice in her veins. "For now. But he's under strict orders not to leave the state, and he's being monitored electronically." Jennifer's voice carried little confidence. "The problem is, Silas has resources we're only beginning to understand. Swiss bank accounts, private security firms, friends in very high places." Through the safe house windows, Aurora could see the Texas night settling over the hills like a dark blanket. Somewhere out there, the man who'd murdered her parents was free and undoubtedly planning his next move. The thought made her skin crawl. "He won't run," Adakus said quietly. "Running would be an admission of guilt. He'll fight this in court, try to discredit us, claim the recording was fabricated. That's what we're counting on," Jennifer replied. "His arrogance is his weakness. If he'd just disappeared quietly, he might have gotten away with it, but he can't resist trying to control the narrative." At that moment, Aurora's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She showed the screen to Agent Flores, who nodded for her to answer but gestured for silence from the others. "Hello, Aurora." Silas's voice was calm, almost conversational. "I hope you're comfortable in your government accommodations. How did you get this number?" "My dear girl, you're dealing with someone who's spent 30 years learning how to acquire information. A private cell phone number is child's play." Jennifer was frantically signaling for Aurora to keep him talking, while agents traced the call. "What do you want, Silas?" "I want to offer you one final opportunity to reconsider our earlier discussion. Despite the unfortunate events of this evening, my offer of financial compensation for your discretion still stands." "You're joking. You just confessed to murdering my parents." "I confessed to nothing. I made some inflammatory remarks in the heat of the moment. Remarks that could easily be taken out of context by overzealous federal agents looking to make their careers." Aurora could hear the politician in his voice, already spinning the narrative for public consumption. "The FBI has you dead to rights. Silas, it's over. Nothing is over until I say it's over." His voice turned cold. "You should know that I've spent the last few hours making some calls to old friends. It's amazing how quickly evidence can disappear, how witnesses can develop memory problems, how cases can fall apart due to prosecutorial misconduct." "Are you threatening us?" "I'm informing you of the reality of your situation. You can cooperate with me and live comfortable lives far away from here. Or you can continue this foolish crusade and face the consequences." The line went dead. Jennifer looked up from her laptop. "We traced it to a burner phone, but the location keeps moving. He's in a vehicle, probably heading out of the city." "Where would he go?" Adakus asked. Jennifer pulled up a map on her computer. "If I were him, I'd go back to where it all started. Back to the scene of the original crime." Aurora felt a chill of recognition. "The ruins of our house. It makes sense. He's feeling cornered, desperate. Men like Silas often return to the place where they first seized power, looking for some way to regain control, or to destroy the last evidence," Adakus added grimly. Outside, the rumble of helicopter rotors filled the night air. Jennifer spoke rapidly into her radio, coordinating with other agents. "We're moving out. Silas has slipped his electronic monitoring, cut the ankle bracelet 20 minutes ago. We think he's heading for the old Hawthorne property." The drive back to East Texas felt like traveling through a nightmare. Aurora sat in the back of an FBI vehicle, watching the familiar landscape roll past in the darkness, while federal agents coordinated their response over radio chatter. Behind them, a convoy of law enforcement vehicles followed, their emergency lights painting the night in red and blue. "Why would he go there?" she asked Agent Flores. "Men like Beaumont are creatures of symbolism. That property represents his original victory, his first taste of real power. If he's planning something desperate, that's where he'd make his stand." As they approached the ruins of the Hawthorne estate, Aurora could see orange light flickering against the night sky. "Fire," she whispered. "He's burning evidence," Jennifer said into her radio. "All units, approach with caution. Suspect may be armed and is definitely dangerous." They stopped at the entrance to the property, and Aurora could see Silas's silhouette against the flames. He'd built a bonfire in the center of the old foundation, feeding it with boxes of documents and files. The light danced across his face, making him look like a demon risen from the ashes of her childhood home. "Silas Beaumont," Jennifer's voice boomed through a megaphone. "This is the FBI. You're surrounded. Step away from the fire and surrender." Silas looked up at the line of federal vehicles, his face twisted with rage and defiance. "You want the truth?" he shouted back. "You want to know what really happened here 20 years ago?" He grabbed a gasoline can and began dousing the remaining papers, the flames leaping higher with each splash. Richard Hawthorne was a fool, a sentimental fool who would have let billions of dollars rot in the ground rather than develop it properly. "He's lost it," Adakus said quietly. "I built something magnificent from the ashes of his failure." Silas continued his rant, the fire reflecting in his eyes. "I brought prosperity to this entire region. I created thousands of jobs. I made East Texas relevant again. By murdering innocent people," Aurora shouted, surprising herself with her own courage. Silas turned toward her voice, his face contorting with hatred. "Innocent. Your father was going to destroy everything. He was going to block the oil development, tie up the land in conservation trusts, doom this entire area to poverty. So you killed him for it. I saved this region from his weakness. Silas grabbed another can of gasoline. This one clearly intended for a different purpose. And I'll save it from you too. He began splashing gasoline around the foundation, moving with the desperate energy of a man who had nothing left to lose. Aurora realized with horror that he was preparing to recreate the fire that had destroyed her family 20 years ago. He's going to try to burn us all, she said. Jennifer was already coordinating with her team. Sharpshooters in position, but he's too close to the fire. One shot could ignite everything. Silas struck a match, holding it high like a torch. Some sacrifices have to be made for the greater good. Your parents understood that in the end. But as he moved to throw the match, Aurora saw something that made her heart stop. Behind Silas, emerging from the darkness like an avenging spirit, was a figure she recognized. Thomas Crane, the man who'd saved her from the original fire. The man they'd all believed was dead. 20 years of guilt and regret had brought him back to the place where it all began, and he was carrying something that glinted in the firelight. The past was about to come full circle. Thomas! Silas's voice cracked as he recognized the figure emerging from the shadows. The man he'd believed dead for 5 years stood at the edge of the firelight, older and grayer, but unmistakably alive. That's impossible. You died, heart attack. I went to your funeral. You went to the funeral of a homeless man I paid to take my identity, Thomas Crane replied, his voice heavy with 20 years of carried guilt. I've been watching from the shadows ever since, waiting for the right moment to make things right. The gasoline can slipped from Silas's trembling hands as the magnitude of this revelation hit him. You've been alive all this time. All these years you could have what? Confessed to being an accessory to murder? Given up the only leverage I had to keep Aurora safe? Thomas stepped closer, and Aurora could see the weapon in his hand. Not a gun, but a digital recorder. I've been documenting everything, Silas. Every crime, every cover-up, every life you've destroyed in your climb to power. Agent Flores spoke quietly into her radio. Hold positions. Let this play out. Aurora watched the confrontation unfold with a mixture of fascination and terror. The 3 men who had shaped her destiny, the murderer, the reluctant accomplice, and her brother, were finally facing each other in the place where it all began. You destroyed that little girl's life, Thomas continued, his voice gaining strength. You made me carry her away from her burning home, made me lie to that kind woman who took her in, made me disappear so I could never tell the truth about what you'd done. I saved that girl's life, Silas protested. If she'd stayed in that house, she would have grown up with her parents, in her own home, knowing who she was. Thomas's voice cracked with emotion. Instead, she spent 20 years believing she was an orphan, believing she was alone in the world. Aurora stepped forward, no longer content to watch from the sidelines. I'm right here, she said firmly, and I remember everything now. I remember you carrying me out of the house, crying as you put me in your car. I remember you whispering that you were sorry. Thomas turned to look at her, and she could see tears streaming down his weathered face. I've been sorry every day for 20 years, Aurora. Sorry I didn't have the courage to save your parents. Sorry I didn't stop him before he destroyed your family. But you saved me, Aurora said softly, when he would have killed a 7-year-old child. You chose to save me instead. And look what good it did, Silas snarled, his composure completely shattered. 20 years of complications, 20 years of looking over my shoulder, waiting for this moment. I should have handled it myself from the beginning. He reached for the dropped gasoline can, but Adakus was faster. Aurora's brother tackled Silas around the waist, sending both men tumbling toward the flames. They rolled away from the fire, grappling for control as federal agents moved in. It's over, Silas, Adakus panted as he pinned the older man to the ground. No more running, no more hiding, no more lies. It's never over, Silas spat. You think this ends with me? You think I'm the only one with blood on my hands? The oil industry, the political machine, the development companies, they'll find another way. They always do. Agent Flores and her team moved in to take Silas into custody, but Aurora barely noticed. Her attention was focused on Thomas Crane, the man who'd shaped her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. Why did you fake your death? She asked him. Because I knew this day would come eventually. Silas's greed would drive him to make a mistake, and when it did, I wanted to be ready with evidence. Thomas held up the digital recorder. 20 years of conversations, recorded phone calls, documented meetings, everything you need to put him away forever. And to clear your own name, Thomas smiled sadly. There's no clearing my name, Aurora. I was there that night. I helped cover up murder. I took you away from your family, even if it was to save your life. I'll spend whatever time I have left in prison, but at least you'll finally have justice. The fire was dying down now. The last of Silas's desperate attempt to destroy evidence reduced to smoldering ash. Aurora looked around at the ruins of her childhood home, but for the first time, she didn't see just destruction. She saw the foundation upon which something new could be built. What happens now? She asked Agent Flores. Now we have enough evidence to put Silas away for multiple life sentences. Thomas's recordings, your phone recording, financial documents we've recovered. It's an overwhelming case. Jennifer smiled. And thanks to Thomas, we've also got evidence of the broader corruption network. This is going to bring down a lot of powerful people. As dawn broke over the East Texas hills, Aurora stood with Adakus among the ruins of their family home. The media had arrived, satellite trucks lining the road, reporters broadcasting the story of the Hawthorne siblings' 20-year journey to justice. Are you okay? Adakus asked, putting his arm around her shoulders. I think so. For the first time in my life, I actually know who I am. Aurora touched her scar one last time, but now the gesture felt like saying goodbye to an old friend. Aurora Hawthorne, daughter of Richard and Catherine, sister to Adakus, survivor of a tragedy that tried to erase our entire family. And what do we do now that we know who we are? Aurora looked at the blackened foundation where their house had once stood, then at the rolling hills that stretched to the horizon. We rebuild, not just our family name, but something better, something that honors what Mom and Dad wanted for this land. The Hawthorne Foundation, Adakus said thoughtfully. Agricultural development, land conservation, supporting farming families who are struggling like you were, using the oil money that Silas stole from us to help people instead of destroying them. Over the following months, the trials of Silas Beaumont and his co-conspirators dominated headlines across Texas and beyond. The evidence was overwhelming, the corruption network vast, and the convictions swift. Silas received 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Thomas Crane, in exchange for his cooperation and the evidence he'd gathered, received a reduced sentence of 10 years. Aurora visited Thomas in prison once. 6 months after the trials ended, they sat across from each other in the visitation room. 2 people whose lives had been forever intertwined by one horrible night. Do you hate me? He asked quietly. I did, for a while, Aurora admitted. But then I realized that hate was just another prison, another way of letting Silas control my life. You made a terrible choice that night, but you also made a choice that saved my life. I can live with that contradiction. And I can die knowing that I finally did the right thing. Aurora returned to Texas to oversee the reconstruction of the family estate, not as a replica of what had been lost, but as something new, a modern farmhouse surrounded by sustainable agriculture projects and conservation lands. The Hawthorne Foundation grew rapidly, funded by the recovered oil revenues and supported by people who'd been inspired by the siblings' story. On the first anniversary of Silas's conviction, Aurora and Adakus held a dedication ceremony for the new house. Friends, neighbors, federal agents who'd become allies, and journalists who'd helped tell their story gathered on the same ground where their parents had died. 20 years ago, someone tried to erase the Hawthorne family from existence, Aurora said in her speech. They succeeded in taking our parents, our childhood home, and our memories, but they couldn't take something more fundamental, the values our parents instilled in us, the love that binds families together, and the belief that justice, however delayed, will eventually prevail. As the sun set over the restored Hawthorne lands, Aurora felt something she'd never experienced before, the deep peace of knowing exactly where she belonged. The little girl who'd been torn from her home and hidden away had grown into a woman who'd reclaimed not just her identity, but her family's legacy. Some roots, she reflected, really were too strong to be destroyed by time or tragedy, or the ambitions of evil men. They might be buried, forgotten, or transplanted, But they would always find a way to grow again, stronger and deeper than before. The Hawthorne family was home,